All right, so this is one more of Hopkins' terrible sonnets, or his sonnets of desolation, or the dark sonnets, however you may want to describe them. Um, but he went through a period of time when he was in maybe 4 years or so, when he was in very dark depression, and even losing touch with God as he tried hard to, seek counsel from God in his state of mind, and he felt no comfort. So many of his poems, well, six of them anyway, deal with this subject of mental anguish. And this is one that is almost more on the end of his period of anguish. You might even call it a period of recovery, because he starts to look at himself, and he advises himself about how to deal with what's happening in his life and leaving it to the hands of God. Now that's the other point that's important, that in all of his terrible sonnets, they're always enmeshed with the idea that God's part of it. In other words, that he is not in despair, like in that, I'm not carrying in comfort. He's saying that he is not going to despair, and he's looking for God. All right, and in each of these six different poems, we find that same theme there, that he is working his way through almost therapeutically, by addressing them to God. Okay, so he's talking to God. For example, in that Carrying Comfort Again, I think that's the poem. He wrestles with God. At the end of it, he comes to the realization that this combat that he was engaged in was with his Savior, Jesus. And he says, "My God," at the end of that poem. That was his last two lines, "My God," when he realizes it. So here again, we have that. And again, because of his difficult construction, it's very hard to find meaning in a first reading. So we'll read it through, and then I'll go back and tear it apart and see what we can come up with in terms of this poem's meaning. In the title, "My Own Heart, Let Me Have More Pity On." My own heart, let me have more pity on. Let me live to my sad self hereafter kind, charitable, not live this tormented mind with this tormented mind tormenting yet. I cast for comfort I can no more get by groping round my comfort less than blind eyes in their dark can, day or thirst, can find thirsts all in all, a world of wet. Soul, self, come, poor Jack self, I do advise you, jaded, let be, call off thoughts awhile, elsewhere, leave comfort root room, let joy sighs, at God knows when, to God knows what, whose smiles not wrung, see you, unforeseen times rather, as skies between pie mountains lights a lovely mile. Okay, there's no question about the difficulty that lies within this poem. It's not the easiest thing to read through. Okay, so remember that he is talking about his having to deal with this frightful and deep depression for many years. And he reaches a point where he comes to realization that he must take this thing in hand and leave it in the hands of God. Okay, and that's what happens in the sestet of it. All right, so let me walk through the octave and explain the meaning of some of the words there. So he begins talking to himself, my own heart, let me have more pity on. Okay? Let me live to my sad self, hereafter kind. All right, so that's no question. Be charitable to myself, not live this tormented mind with this tormented mind tormenting me yet. All right, so that repetition, that sprung rhythm, tormented, 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 So we're getting that, but he is still seeking, comfort. I cast for comfort. I can no more get it, though, by groping around my comfortlessness, all right, the lack of comfort, than a blind person whose eyes are in the dark can find day. Or, now another analogy, as a thirsty person, or thirst can find thirsts all in a world of wet. In other words, it's out there, but can't find it, all right? So that's the opening octave. He sets up his proposition that this is the way things are, and he must do something about it. So here in the sestet, he's again speaking to himself, saying, soul, self, come, poor Jack self, talking to himself, calling himself a Jack self, like a regular guy, a hard-working person, like a ditch digger or something like that. Poor Jack self. I do advise you, jaded, let be. In other words, that might be let go. Let things be. Don't deal with them anymore. Call off thoughts a while elsewhere. All right? And then leave comfort room for God to work in it. In other words, leave a space for joy to enter, and the word size mean grow. Let joy size that God knows when to God knows what. In other words, leave it to God. It's not me. I don't make that decision. I don't determine when and where this is going to happen. So he says God knows when it's going to happen, and God knows what he's going to do in my life to brighten my life and to give me comfort. And now he's talking about God's smile is not something that you can wring. See, whose smile is not wrung. In other words, he's saying that you can't force it on God and see you. That means you understand, you better recognize the fact that you cannot wring a smile from God. All right, God knows what's going on in your mind, or in my mind. He's really talking about. Okay, God knows my situation, so leave it to Him, to unforeseen times rather than what I want. So there's the comparison. Leave it to God to do it rather than me to determine when it's going to be done and how it's going to be done. So leave it to God. And he uses this beautiful comparison here. He loves the word pied, pied beauty. And pied means like many colors and consisting of a brightness, but mostly a number of multicolors. And he describes God's constellation as something like that would be found in the sky between mountain peaks, as skies between pie mountains. All right? And what do you see? A lovely shaft of light lighting a lovely mile in my life. So this sestet is saying that if you leave it into the hands of God, God will send that shaft of light, beautiful brightness in color between the mountaintops. Maybe there would be clouds around it, but it would be coming in, lighting a lovely mile, and that mile is his future. It would open up something in the form of consolation, a ray of hope, for his own prospects for the future. So That's what the sestet is about. So I'll read it again. It says, my own heart let me have more pity on. Let me live to my sad self hereafter kind, charitable, not live this tormented mind, with this tormented mind tormenting yet. I cast for comfort I can no more get by groping round my comfortless than blind eyes in their dark can. They, or thirst can find thirsts all in a world of wet. Soul, self, come, poor Jack's self, I do advise you, jaded, let be, call off thoughts a while elsewhere, leave comfort root room, let joy sighs at God knows when to God knows what, whose smiles not wrong, see you, unforeseen times rather, as skies between pie mountains, lights a lovely mile. All right, so hope I opened it up a little more. And then this is my analysis. The sonnet's another of his sonnets known as the Terrible Sonnets, or Desolation. And Desolation goes along with the terrible, sonnets of terror, but desolate. He feels abandoned by God. All right, so that's why some of them are called sonnets of desolation. He feels a sense of desolation, being removed from God, and that idea that he talked about writing to a God who lives far away and not getting a reply, in which he addresses himself here directly to God with great honesty and reveals a tormented mind hopelessly seeking comfort. In another poem entitled I'll Not Carrying Comfort, he asserts that he will not seek pity. This poem seems closely associated with that resolve, for he struggles to find some kind of hope for his torment, and that's what he does in the sestet, against the realization that if he leaves it in the hands of God, God will open up the skies and send that, bright ray of light into his life. Recognizing his wounded mental state, he opens the poem with a statement suggesting that he must be more charitable to himself going forward, written during this period of deep depression when he was in Ireland and he felt a lack of productivity. He said that his roots were dry. He needed water, to flourish as a tree might or a shrub. And he uses all those images, those metaphors, showing his lack of productivity, and especially during his time in Ireland. It was about 5 or 6 years that he went through this period. And in a letter to his friend Robert Bridges, he wrote, "If I could but produce work, I should not mind it being buried, silenced, and going no further. But it kills me to be time's eunuch and never beget." Now, what he meant by that was nothing that he ever wrote was published during his lifetime. Okay, I think it was 30 years later. I think it was like 1916 or so, when Bridges got around to publishing his work. And by that time, Hopkins was dead a good number of years. He died in 1889. So from 1889 to 1919, all right, or 1916. In another poem entitled "To Seem a Stranger Lies My Lot," he laments the inability to attain consolation even from his prayer life, comparing his prayers to mail sent to dead letter department to a loved one far away. So that came up again and again in all 6 sonnets. The first line of the sonnet, entreating himself to be kinder to himself, gives a vivid picture of his helplessness. He pleads that he might not live this tormented mind, with this tormented mind tormenting yet. The sentence repeating the word tormented 3 times reverberates a tone of anguish, akin to lines from Walt Whitman's poem entitled "When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom," was addressed. It was an ode to Abraham Lincoln, when Lincoln died, was assassinated. He wrote this beautiful poem, and in the opening part of the poem, he addresses Lincoln with these words, and you might see the similarity. That's why I included it here. You can feel the turmoil and the anguish that Whitman felt at the death of Lincoln. He says, "Oh," and his Western Star is Lincoln. You know the metaphor. "O powerful western fallen star, O shades of night, O moody, tearful night, O great star disappeared, O black mirth that hides the star, O cruel hands that hold me powerless, O helpless soul of me, O harsh surrounding cloud that will not free my soul." All right, so in those lines, you feel his anguish, much the same as that of Hopkins. And he compares his inner state to one imprisoned. He uses the image of one groping around in my comfortless. The octave ends with another comparison in which he compares himself to find comfort to that of a blind person seeking daylight, which is a futile endeavor. Structurally, the turn of the sonnet introduces a new element in the sestet, such as a change of tone, attitude, or reversal of argument. Here, the change is that one of a seemingly hopeless state to one of hope. Hopkins addresses himself as a humble figure, calling himself poor Jack Self. He advises himself to leave off this misery for a while and find room for new thoughts to take root and grow. This may even include joy or anything God might have in mind for him. He advises himself to leave it all to God to decide when or what it is that he might have in mind, what God might have in mind for his life. He further advises himself that he cannot push this thing, cannot wring from God a smile. His future depends not on his own terms, but on trusting in God's choice of time and God's choice of how, manner. Leave room for comfort to come when God chooses to send it, and joy will size, will grow. So the image of God's smile, unforeseen, you can't see it now, you just have to trust, that's the key word here, or coming by surprise, is that of the slant of beautiful sunlight suddenly bursting out between the tops of a mountain, and it's described as that will light a lovely mile. So he calls it pie, which is multicolored, mountain pie. This sonnet begins with a tone of darkness and despair and ends with a ray of sunshine and hope. The speaker's cries of anguish, like those found in all of Hopkins' terrible sonnets, are always addressed to God. The construction of these masterpieces would appear to be a therapeutic exercise, for Hopkins' consolation from his deep depression might be seen in the craftsmanship of his works, which often resemble the Psalms, with the plea of Jesus on the cross saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" So that is what this sonnet is about, and that's how it comes out. I'll read it one last time. "My own heart, let me have more pity on. Let me live to my sad self, hereafter kind, charitable, not live this tormented mind, with this tormented mind tormenting yet. I cast for comfort, I can no more get by groping round my comfort less than blind eyes in their dark can day, or thirst can find thirsts all in a world of wet. So, self, come, poor Jack Self, I do advise you, jaded, let be, call off thoughts a while elsewhere. Leave comfort room, let joy size, at God knows when or to God knows what, who smiles not wrong, see you, unforeseen times rather, as skies between pie mountains lights a lovely mile.